Welcome to the Climate Trends podcast. This is a space where we discuss key topics shaping climate change and sustainable development. In today's episode, we're looking at how India's urban pockets can be built to be more resilient against impacts of climate change and how the industry can support India's ambitious mitigation efforts. And for the real estate industry to be able to do that, what are the opportunities and gaps? This is also an opportunity to mark the International Women's Day 2025. So, we would love to also discuss the kind of space women hold in this industry and to be making an impact. To unpack all of this, we have a very special guest, Dr. Sunita Purushottam, who's joining us to have this conversation with us today. She has over 25 years of experience in sustainability strategy and environmental consultancy. She's looked at environmental impact assessment, air pollution modeling, greenhouse gas emissions inventory, carbon neutrality strategies, waste management. There's a lot on her portfolio, and we're very excited to have you on this show, Dr. Purushottam.
Thank you so much, Manjari. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. So we thought let's start with just the very basics and just dive into what are green buildings, because that's some of the things I'm sure that you'll have a lot to speak about. But just for our listeners to a little bit set context, very, in a nutshell, if you can explain what are green buildings and why do they matter?
Well, green buildings, I would say, are buildings that are developed with a thought for environmental sustainability in the context of where it is, right? So green buildings primarily look at 5 areas. One is the site context. Then we have materials and materials efficiency, waste management, energy efficiency, water management, emissions associated with it, so the energy piece associated with the buildings, and the indoor air quality. So these are the primary elements of green building. And of course, there are certain programs where even the construction welfare, the labor welfare is looked at while we make these buildings. So it's environmental and social aspects of design, construction, and occupancy is what makes a green building stand apart. So basically thoughtful buildings, I would say, not just from an end user perspective, but also on how we are developing a building.
Understood. So when a lot of thought is gone into developing an idea and doing design projections, is there also like a lot of data that you use or is available or not available that you're able to compare with the actual performance of a green building with respect to energy or water savings, like you mentioned? So I'm just wondering if how much, sort of information is available for you to assess actual performance versus design projections.
Okay, so interesting. From a developer perspective, sometimes it becomes difficult to go back and assess a building after it is handed over. However, a developer also has in its portfolio its own operations, correct? And if that is the sales office and the project offices, and it is always possible to gather the data and assess how the building is performing after you have designed it, right? And we have found that buildings that are not properly designed are absolute energy guzzlers. And from a so we have case studies where we can say, oh, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done this, and therefore it is consuming this much energy. You shouldn't have used this much glass. You shouldn't have done glass without shading. You should have used the principle of climate responsive design. You should have given mixed mode operations. That means made provisions for fans and so on. So all of these principles we are able to understand and gather the data of at least what is there in the scope of our operations. Now, when it comes out of scope, which is handed over buildings and consumer related projects, that is buildings that are handed over. So we are a developer, so we hand over buildings, and then the Resident Welfare Association. So we have done a couple of studies, and these studies show that energy, water, waste generation, water consumption, energy consumption are definitely much lower than a baseline case. And apart from that, we also do green cities. So our industrial cities are where we manage the entire water, energy infrastructure for street lighting, traffic lights, then the sewage treatment plant, the water treatment plant, the solar, and all of that. So all of that performance is something that we monitor and track, and definitely the performance is much better if we take all the sustainability measures, no doubt.
So you would really recommend to put in methodologies that collect post-occupancy data and that helps design.
Yeah, data helps. Data
Yeah,
helps, to show that how the building is behaving. Also, consumer behavior can be influenced if you have data. So end user behavior can be influenced. For example, a housing society, if we provide the net metering facility for the solar, then they will know how much solar is getting generated. They will know, okay, what is the common area energy bill. So all of these definitely should be used by the resident welfare association. Societies must use it to monitor their energy data.
right. And that sort of together helps achieve best possible sustainability outcomes that we're
Yeah,
doing.
definitely. Definitely, it pushes people to look at the information and see how things can be improved further.
Right. Great. I think it's a great segue to talk a little more on climate responsive designs, especially that India is such a diverse geography. We have regions like Rajasthan to tropical coastal areas, and they also have Himalayan foothills. Lots of communities are in different parts of India, and the traditional architecture has also evolved. And there are distinct solutions for each region, and so I'm just wondering how modern development also applies those, standardized approaches across these diverse conditions. Is that recommended? Of course, I would say that you might say it's not. But in what ways can the real estate industry adapt sustainable design strategies across these very varied climate zones in India and any region
So
specific?
there is a huge amount of work that has happened in this. Okay. And this work has happened by the Ministry of Power, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, under a project called Building Energy Efficiency Program. And the building codes, that is, there are two codes. One is ECBC, Energy Conservation Building Code for commercial buildings, and then there is another one which is Energy Conservation Building Code for residential, ECBCR. ECBC commercial, ECBCR. ECBCR is called as Eco Nivas Samhita. Eco Nivas Samhita takes this into account, that what should be the kind of building guidelines that a particular location must follow. Now let me come into what actually it means, and how these guidelines have to be followed location by location. So, okay. Before that, want to explain what is climate responsive design. Climate responsive design is designing for least possible air conditioning and least possible artificial lights during the day, not required artificial lights during the day. And the end outcomes is basically thermal and visual comfort ensured at all time, right? For the occupant. Now, let me explain what is thermal comfort. Thermal comfort is you should be comfortable without using air conditioning, and you should be comfortable without using artificial light, and you shouldn't have glare also. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable because of excessive use of daylighting that has happened because of your design. Now, how do you achieve this? You achieve this by strategies. There are 5 strategies. One is avoid and orient. Orienting the building is very important. And we recommend that the long phase of the building has to be north-south. Okay, long face of the building has to be positioned north and south. The reason is that we don't want the long face to get east, uh, east sun and west sun, because it is direct sun that we will get. So the long face always should face the north and the south, not east and west. Because if you have windows that have the direct heat coming in, the solar radiation will be very, very high. So we have to minimize the solar radiation through the windows and the openings. And we have to minimize the heat gain that is happening through the walls and the roof. That brings us to another strategy, which is insulate. Wall and roof has to be insulated, right? And these insulation or the thick walls, in case of our earlier traditional architecture, it used to be really thick walls. Thick walls gives a thermal mass. Thermal mass means that before even the heat would get in, it would be evening, right? Because we had thick walls, and by evening the temperature outside would have reduced. All the heat would actually not come inside the house. Okay, so that is the fun of having traditional thick walls. And when it comes to so walls, and when it comes to the roof, we are looking at the roof also should provide insulation. And natural ventilation. So ventilation is the other strategy. So I spoke about avoid and orient, insulation, ventilate, and we're now going to talk about heat, shading. So windows have to be shaded. Okay, so and it is in modern architecture there is a lot of use of glass, and this glass is often not shaded. And typically, if you were not to shade glass, then you would end up using high performance glass, because you don't want the heat to come in. So practice is that in commercial buildings you use double glazed units or high performance glass, and you're not even shading the building. But even in commercial building, even after making provision for high performance glass, if you have shade, the building envelope behaves much better. The energy, there is a substantial reduction in the energy consumption. So that is the importance of shading. The other point I wanted to mention is reflecting the heat is very important. And walls can be reflective, roof can be reflective, and to reflect the heat out of the building is very important. And designing for adequate daylight. Now, important is adequate daylight. The window openings should be such that the wall to window ratio should be less than 40%. In fact, 17%, 18% is what traditional architecture would use, even lesser. In certain cases, if you go to very hot places, there are jali windows, which are very small openings, right? And the openings used to be so small in those havelis that they would get the air, they would get a little bit of light, but heat would be kept out. And that's how traditional architecture has made buildings where it is cool even in diverse conditions. So I recently went to Thiruvananthapuram and went to a temple, and it was extremely hot. But when you enter into the temple presence, it was extremely cool. What was used? Stone was used. The stone was extremely thick, right? And those thick stones don't let the heat come in. Yeah. So climate responsive design for every part of the country is part of the ethos of traditional architecture. You go to places where there is rain, a lot of rainfall that is happening. It's always thatched roofs. If you in Bombay now we have flat roofs. It gives rise to a lot of leakage problems, issues, because there is a lot of rainfall. So taking the climate into account for building designs is very important. And if you were to take these principles into modern architecture and use the strategies of avoid, orient, shade, reflect, ventilate, insulate, we could potentially practice much better building design than we are currently doing.
It does seem like, a lot of planning and thought would go into developing climate responsive, especially when, it's not just like a one size fit all kind of a project. When you're looking at a different city, Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, they all experience high temperatures, but they've just different kind of climatic regions as well. So I'm just wondering if, such this kind of planning also affects, the projects, the timelines, affordability of housing as well to an extent. Like, does that affect the market as well, in your opinion?
Not really, actually, because if you design well and if architects were to do the climatology section of the coursework of climatology, it can be integrated into design. So the analysis that needs to be done is climate, what is the weather pattern of that location, how does the sun travel in your particular location, what kind of solar radiation is going to be incident on the building, shading analysis to see how is the shading designed for efficient shading. Then, depending upon the whole time, the whole annual cycle of the sun. Then we have CFD analysis for the wind flow analysis, then comfort energy analysis and daylight analysis. All these analysis should not, increase your cost because it should be part of the design. And if you do this as part of design, up to 30% of the energy demand can be reduced. And you can operate buildings in mixed mode operation 30, 35, 40. In fact, if you design a very good building, you can actually run it in mixed mode with only fans without air conditioning.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you have any interesting example to share on, any heat mitigation strategies in, high density urban area, like in a city like Delhi, Mumbai, and how effective, if there's any interesting example of a development that you could share.
I would say example I'll take from Mahindra only. Mahindra World City, Chennai is 3 to 4 degrees cooler than Chennai.
Wow.
Yeah. And you have to come there and experience the temperature difference. You come from Chennai and then you come to the city and you will understand. We have integrated a lot of blue green areas. And I wouldn't call it high density per se. It is low rise to mid-rise kind of buildings. There are some high rises that are coming up over there, but it is industrial and it's an integrated city. But that kind of development definitely is possible. We need to work on the density. That intense run for densification does not allow us spaces for green. Green matters. Blue-green matters. It really matters from a resilience perspective. And if we do not make provision and enter into a game where we are doing densification, it is going to be very difficult. Moreover, the problem that we have is the use of the building materials, and we can come to the building materials subsequently.
Before we do that, I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit about what it would require in terms of reforms, whether there are structural reforms that can help ensure climate adaptation is not just an afterthought in urban planning.
So I think the building conservation and sustainability building code has to be deployed and implemented across states. In terms of structural reforms, in India, we do not just, we are okay with putting a building code out, but we don't look at the implementation of the building code. I think the reform is required in making provision and support for educating the local authorities to deploy the code. Okay. Deploying the code, it has got everything that I spoke about: water window ratio, insulation, what should be done in your design, what should be done in the roof, what kind of insulation you should be providing, what kind of materials you should be using. I think it is there in the code. Okay. We need to have a mindset where there is a policy deployment structure and governance at the local authority level. And that reform is required. We cannot just have a code and say that, we have a code. Okay. But that code has to be deployed like a fire code. NOC is not obtained if you don't have the measures. Okay, so fire NOC is a good example of deployment at a ground level. That every building permission is linked to, have you ticked all the boxes? Similarly, for energy efficient building, all these have to be deployed at the while building permissions are granted, and once the building is done, to get the occupancy certificate whether all the things have been done. So that deployment is required. If that deployment is not there, then we are only talking, isn't it?
Yeah, that's quite insightful. So yes, then moving on to talking about construction materials and the embodied carbon, more importantly. But just to set a little bit of context, that India is the world's second largest cement producer. And it is causing almost 22% of the country's carbon emissions. And there is obviously a huge need for urbanization in several spaces, and we're expecting to add over 400 million urban dwellers in the next 25 years. So, embodied carbon presents a massive climate challenge, and I think it would be interesting to hear from you at least just to even explain what that embodied carbon really means, and if you have any strategies around tackling that as a concept or as a source of emissions.
So I think embodied carbon, people think it is to do with the manufacturing of the material. Okay. Whereas embodied carbon, and if you see the life cycle carbon of a building, also involves transportation, manufacturing, and its use, the energy used in the building, the operational aspect of the what happens when you use concrete. So embodied carbon per se is not just what has gone into the manufacturing process. So you should it's linked to where it is getting manufactured as well, and how the transportation is happening. And hence, from a sustainability perspective, manufacturing process improvement is the first step, right? So the cement industry in India is quite efficient when it comes to the emissions associated with its production processes. It has worked extensively with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development on the Cement Sustainability Initiative, where emissions associated with manufacturing have been targeted. Now, the next step for the built environment is there any alternative to cement, right? And how do we then reduce the cement in the concrete mix? So we use concrete, right? So if you were to take, and replace one third of the cement that we are using, say by a certain amount of alternative materials such as coal industry waste, which is fly ash, and GGBS. Okay, so 30% can be replaced of the cement can be replaced, and it has become a standard practice now. GGBS gives more strength. It is cost effective. Both fly ash and GGBS are cost effective. However, both fly ash and cement are outputs of a fossil fuel industry, isn't it? So, and since it is outcomes of a fossil fuel industry, and assuming that in time these fossil fuel industries will also not be there in time, and if we go through a transition process away from fossil fuels, then we are currently looking at clay, which is called limestone calcined clay cement. LC3 it is called. There is LC2 also. That you must basically replace the amount of cement using clay. So the clink that so if you were to replace that in the clinker component of the cement, then the amount of carbon dioxide emissions associated with the cement manufacturing, if you were to do LC3 itself, would reduce. So here we were in the concrete mix, we are adding fly ash and GGBS. Here now in the cement, in the clinker, we are reducing the amount of clinker. So limestone calcined clay is what There is a new standard that the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has approved, I think in 2023 or 2024, it got approved. There are licenses now that are being obtained for manufacture of LC3. And we hope that, you know, uh, uh, it goes through and the pedal is pushed on this from us. So that can reduce the cement embodied carbon by about 40%. That is the promise. But the thing is that are we manufacturing buildings? Are we manufacturing? No. Are we making buildings for the sake of making buildings? For example, the entire redevelopment movement that is happening, where there is a high FSI. So I think there is another structural reform required, that we really need to look at the high FSI game and the redevelopment aspects. That a building actually has to be checked whether it should go for redevelopment, and life cycle of building should be minimum 75 to 100 years. And if otherwise, everybody will get into the redevelopment bandwagon. And in my thought is that we have not utilized a building to its full extent. And because if you see architecture of the old, we have 200 years, 300 years old buildings as well, 400, 500, 600, 700-year-old building. I don't know. You'll have to run through the entire gamut of country to find these buildings, but those buildings exist. The palaces in Jaipur, Rajasthan, you go to the south, there are many such structures which are there, which have been there for a long time. So, and they were made with many times made with natural material and limestone, plaster, and techniques that have lasted through centuries. In fact, in the olden structures, in the traditional structures, once you make a building, you actually don't even have to paint it. So that's what. So if you use yellow sandstone or red sandstone, there's no painting required. There's no maintenance required for these buildings. Then you make buildings with thatched roofs. Then you don't even have to manage them for rain. That's because they are climate responsive. And what are we learning out of it? Ki sab similar buildings banao, glass use karo, extensive glass usage is happening. So there is another policy reform in the building code itself, so that people are able to deploy it very easily. That wall to window ratio, this window sill size 900, 1.2. Safety. So from a safety perspective, it has to be 1.2. Okay. And not have windows till the end. So these are certain things that have to be brought in very, very, very drastically across the country. So
I think, yeah, you're absolutely spot on to point out that, if a building is basically not thoughtfully and mindfully planned and built, it's just basically a liability for the rest of its life cycle, because it's just going to be lots of assets that are not being utilized properly, or just too much energy consumption, resources getting wasted. So I think that initial thought is just so important going forward into how we plan and design and develop.
Yeah, so I'll just come in over there. And if you look at commercial buildings, you've made a whole box of glass and then you're air conditioning it. So you've just taken everything out and you won't be able to run it in mixed mode operation also. Right. And you're saying that, okay, I've designed a very energy efficient envelope because it's a high performance glass, but you've put in a lot of money over there. So I don't know whether this kind of building design is wise. And any envelope you do with embodied material, whatever material you're using, has an impact on the operational carbon, isn't it?
Yeah. And also the immediate environment, because a lot of glass buildings cause urban heat island effect. And I think.
Okay. Urban heat island effect is when surfaces such as concrete, asphalt, they are used, and during the day, they absorb the heat and release it at night. Okay. So more than glass, it is concrete and asphalt that is creating a problem. This elevated high temperature is at nighttime, experienced at nighttime. And it is compared to the cooler non-concrete surfaces such as soil, grass, and vegetation. And we can experience urban heat effect when we travel from rural areas to city areas at night, typically outskirts of the city, or if we are close to a large park. For example, in Mumbai, if we were to be near Goregaon, Goregaon is much cooler at night as compared to Delhi. So, what gives rise to urban heat island effect? So, urban heat island is actually a heat island, okay, over the city. And these materials absorb, so basically, because of the kind of materials that we are using, concrete and asphalt, then there is high rise and high density building. Then, because that can block the ventilation, the wind flow, and give rise to more heat emissions, because of the cooling infrastructure that is set up on these buildings. For example, air conditioning and the cooling units. So you will have more heat coming out of it. So during the daytime, these also will give out a lot of heat. During nighttime, also they will give a lot of heat. So this is not the retained heat, it is actually these air conditionings putting the heat up. Then there is lack of urban trees and green spaces. Plants actually regulate temperature through trans-evaporation and transpiration. And there is also a lack of natural water bodies. So this definitely doesn't augur well for our cities.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining in detail. I think that was, an important clarification because that's a phenomena which is less understood, and but it has a huge impact on how we are able to function in the cities and just the living.
Yeah, apart from that, we have climate change related impact also. So the rising temperatures that you're experiencing is a combination of human activities that we are doing plus the climate change, right? Human activities on how we have badly designed our buildings, plus the impacts of the emissions associated with materials that we have used, the diesel and the electricity that we are using, plus the refrigerants that we are using. So climate change. So we have 2 to 3 degrees rise that we are experiencing. Though we can say we are now 1.5 degrees, we are going to be crossing the 1.5 degrees very soon. But on an average, our cities are experiencing smaller winters, longer summers, elevated daytime and nighttime temperatures, and all of this is because of the two things. One is what we are currently doing, plus the impact of climate change.
But is it also true that it will incur higher upfront costs in the sense that creating projects that have a longer shelf life, they're thoughtfully designed, but does cost remain a major barrier? And how can we resolve this? Can there be financial instruments that are available or should be made available to make sustainable infrastructure more effectively developed?
I think with anything in life, something that is done with a lot of care does cost you a little bit more. It will cost you effort, it will cost you money, but it will be significantly better for you. Okay. And likewise for green buildings, but green buildings for all the infrastructure interventions that used to be required earlier on, this has now become part of the regulations, right? So how can cost be an impediment anymore? You are supposed to be doing the right thing. And with bare minimum, investment, I mean, because you have to do it as part of the regulation, you can't say that I'm not going to be doing the regulations, right? And regulation, if you're able to meet the regulations, you will at least meet IGBC silver rating. Okay, with a little bit of effort, you will meet IGBC gold. With a little bit more effort, you will get IGBC platinum. Likewise for other certifications. A lot of it is part of the regulation now. Okay. And with the ECS, BC, mostly everything will come into the regulations.
Yeah. But are there financial incentives available that support?
Yes, there are financial incentives available for developers, but those financial incentives are in form of higher FSI, and in my belief that higher FSI is counterproductive to sustainable development.
Okay.
Yeah. In certain cases, there are incentives associated with property tax rebate for consumers. If we were to have a market transformation, the incentive, the right incentive would be on the product. So, for example, if there is a green material that you want to use and it is certified, then the GST of that should be lower, right? So that there is more market adoption of, say, green steel, or say, for example, solar reflective paints that we want to put on roof. So the GST should be much lesser. That is again a structural reform that needs to come. Then the other thing is that for green to become a movement, when you are buying, registration should waiver should happen on green projects.
Okay.
Some aspect in some proportion, that registration fee will be lesser, or a GST rebate should be given to consumers, or a home loan benefit should be given. Like for women, you have home loan at a lower rate for women home owners. Similarly, homeowners that are choosing green projects should have a differentiated interest rate, isn't it? These are the three things that will lead to the market transformation. So I'm talking about structural transformation from a policy side, but this is the market transformation. Policy transformation is leading to a market transformation, and then you will see it will become something that we, do. Uptake will be much higher.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think some of these solutions, if you recommend them as solutions, can be scaled up to really push India's transition to climate resilient infrastructure and making it more mainstream. This is good insights.
Yeah. And but I want to also tell you about what is climate resilient. We use the words very loosely. So climate resilience, we have to look at two aspects. I think any shocks or any risks that we are experiencing because of change in climate, okay, that has to be taken care of. Climate resilient would mean that it is typically, in layman's term, it would be heat resilience and flood resilience, or water availability resilience, or air pollution resilience. Okay, things like that. So we have to actually take the word and break it down so that everybody understands what we are talking about. What if you buy a house and your basement gets flooded with every rain? What if you buy a house that the water quality that you're getting is not at par because you've taken it from a river, and your water treatment plant is not able to cope up with the variety of sewage that is going into our Indian rivers? Okay. So where is the resilience? How are we planning for water? Water is a big thing. While heat resilience I spoke about in the climate resilience, climate responsive design piece, water resilience is important, and therefore every site must do hydrology and hydrogeology studies. Every site must look at biodiversity and how much tree cover we are replacing. That data should be uploaded into government portals and be visible for everybody. Okay. And equal amount of area should be provided in the housing society for whatever trees that we have to plant back or transplant.
Understood. Yeah. I'm glad you touched upon water management as well, because I think
I'm speaking about the trees because they provide flood resilience. Yeah, urban flooding is a thing now. I mean, Bangalore gets flooded, Chennai gets flooded, and Chennai's water bodies were built upon, right? Bangalore's water bodies were built upon. Bombay gets flooded. What has happened to Bombay? Where are the urban trees? Where is the urban resilience? What are the water bodies? And what is the carrying capacity of the water bodies? What is happening is building resilience. Also, trees have a role to play. Blue-green infrastructure. Blue also, because you cannot build on water bodies. Where are the nalas? What happened to them? What are the water channels that go into Mithi River? Where are they now?
Yeah. So creating an urban system is more than just a green building. It's of course the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Just green building, we are taking so in my mind as a woman, I feel things are connected. And if you are looking at it from one lens perspective and saying, I'm going to talk only about green building, it's not going to happen that way. It is the entire development that we are looking at. And if we develop in ways that it is, going to result in making you uncomfortable, then you deserve it. And it's going to be financially, you deserve it. You deserve your buildings to develop cracks, because you've not made, or whatever calamities come onto us. But the problem is that the calamities will not be faced by everybody. It will be faced by the poor people.
Yeah, I guess it's true. Like we invest in a building, there is a certain cost. If you don't invest in a building, then there will be other kinds of cost in future. So I
Yeah.
guess
And that cost may not be borne by you. For those who are in a high rise, in a glass building with
yeah,
glass balconies, they may not be borne by them. It will be borne by people in the vicinity,
yeah,
or say, for example, urban heat we spoke about. Who is suffering? People who are the auto drivers, the cab drivers, people who are on the streets, they are the ones who are suffering, right?
yeah. Yeah, that's a very important perspective. I think a lot of times we miss thinking about impacts beyond, concrete walls. This is just the last bit of our podcast, and it's been such a wonderful conversation so far, so insightful. But we wanted to also talk a little bit about you, your journey in the space you are, and very traditionally, when people think of real estate infrastructure, it always feels like a very male-dominated space. So, and it's really refreshing to speak with you, and you maybe break those barriers down for us to really help us understand how your journey in the sustainability space and working in real estate, and how it's been in the field for you.
Well, I don't know. I'm here by accident, I would say. Uh, you basically flow through life, and you end up somewhere. And I don't know how and where, um, whether it was by design or by all the choices that I made during my life's journey. So I'm basically a physics postgraduate. I did my PhD from IIT Mumbai. Uh, because and that was in environmental science and engineering, and it was in atmospheric physics and air pollution. I actually gave up an opportunity to do pure physics and theoretical physics to do this environmental. So it's in my mind at that time. I felt, okay, this is more applied, and I I was thinking that maybe I shouldn't go for academics and do something, like more on the implementation side of things. So got an opportunity to go abroad. My first job was in UK as a air pollution specialist. I came back to India, and I was with a consulting firm, Canadian consulting firm based in Bombay, and then went back to New Jersey, worked with that firm, came back, joined Infosys, and after that, a startup on ESG platform. So there's a fair amount of technology work that I've done. But my entire experience in sustainability has been cross industries. So it's not just the sector. And with Infosys and my initial work on environmental impact assessments, it gave me a broad view of how the built environment impacts, you know, air, water, noise, and the biodiversity. So I had a good understanding of that. And at Mahindra Life Spaces, this opportunity after the startup, I feel that this opportunity is a golden opportunity for me to prove, implement, work on the ground, and see how the sector responds to the things that we want to do, because there is a lot of resistance and you have to work both top down and bottoms up. But it's been real fun. So that's been my journey, and it's been amazing fun. I've had a lot of fun doing this, and so I would say I'm here by accident, not by design. Though my mother had said that, I was wanting to do civil engineering, and both my parents felt that, maybe I shouldn't choose that because and do physics instead. That was at 12th, and they said you'll be at site all the time. So, and now I'm at site all the time. So,
Yeah, I mean, I should thank you for choosing the path you did because it's really making an impact and, changing
thank you.
course for, yeah.
Thank
I
you.
would just
I
like
wonder if I
to,
would have done only physics. Physics happens to me to be my first love, and
okay.
it gives me an understanding of building physics or anything. And anything I hear, I say, okay, how does it? What does it mean from a physical point of view?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I use that as a basis for understanding my world.
Yeah, it's a really interesting intersection that you sit at. Um,
Yes.
I was also wondering if you have thoughts on, whether as women, what kind of unique perspectives do you think women could bring to urban planning or sustainability? Because you briefly mentioned something earlier, and because I'm sure that you're also a bit of a role model for a lot of young women who are working in the sustainability space. So just to hear from you, what role can women
Yeah.
really play?
Yeah, so basically, we really undermine ourselves and we are very affected by what people say to us. And that is something that we have to really develop a thick skin. हाँ, so for example, घर में कोई बोल देता है अभी यहाँ जाने की जरूरत है क्या, ये काम करने की जरूरत है क्या, और वो हम गांठ बांध के लेते हैं ना कि we think, so for example, you want to get involved in volunteering work, right? Go ahead and do that because you have a lot of you can contribute a lot. Women can contribute a lot. Secondly, from a home perspective, we can actually manage the whole house very well. So the health of the whole family is in our hands. And from that perspective, if we choose the right food, the right clothing, and the right home, roti kapda makan pura hamare haath mein hai. Okay, so roti is the food that we are eating. Kapra is the clothes that we wear. We use a lot of polyester nowadays. There is a lot of polyester fabric that is coming. It's nothing but fossil fuel. Why are we making those choices? Why are we making choices about so much plastic in our lives? It affects your hormones. So it affects your hair, your growth, everything. So these choices are in our hands. So we don't have to wait for anybody. And even while making decisions about buying a house, you should have the first say in it. I want the windows to be shaded, or I want ventilation. I want homes with cross ventilation because that's what will keep my family healthy. Okay, I can't have a claustrophobic kitchen, or I can't have a kitchen which will have this, that, or the other. So the size should be right of the things that you are designing. It should be at your height. For example, the ergonomics of a home. It should be as per you because you are going to be the one who's going to be doing so many of the things within the house. So typically, when we go and see customer walk-ins, women are there, but they are not playing an important role in the buying decision making. So if we were to probably have a list of things that women can look at while deciding how to buy a home, then better decisions will start happening on buying a house. So, and I would also say that more than believing on vastu, believe in actual science, believe in your strength, invest in understanding what is good for you for wearing, good for you for eating, good for you for living. And these are the choices are definitely in your hand, not in any man's hand. Okay. And you have to start educating yourself on all these three aspects because your home is actually impacting your health. So, for example, paint, which paint to use? Low VOC paints, VOCs are linked to cancer. Benzene as a volatile organic compound is not good in the sprays and the perfumes that we are using. So, be aware of all these things. So, being holistically aware is in the hands of the woman. How are men aware of all these nuances? And what are we doing? We are, leaving it out and saying, okay, somebody else will decide it for us. Why should somebody else decide your own health? Prioritize yourself, is what I would say. Start with yourself, your own journey of health and well-being.
Golden words should be carved in stone. But yeah, very, very
Of
inspiring.
course, prioritize yourself. Be
Yeah.
selfish. It's fine.
Yeah.
Duniya chai, dil le.
Perfect. But yeah,
But in a good way.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
No, it's quite inspiring to see, the space you have occupied in, the sustainability space as we speak, and I really hope that a lot of people will be inspired by you. I am, and continue to occupying the space we deserve as women, and playing a greater role in building more climate resilient strategies for India and in our own lives as well. So
Yeah. So you'll have to tell me, promise me that Manjari, next time we speak, you'll have made some changes in your life.
I will, absolutely. That's great. I have homework, but wonderful. I will
Yeah.
absolutely think about it. That's my takeaway from, as part of many other takeaways from today's episode. But yeah, that's a thinker. So thanks so much for all the useful things that you've shared. And it's such an insightful episode. This was really nice talking to you this time today. I hope you had fun too.
I had fun too.
Yeah. Any last final words from you on this?
I would say, from a woman perspective, believe in yourself and take up sustainability because it's important for your own family and yourself. Yourself, prioritize yourself first. Enter this journey. It's important for your health.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, looking forward to more conversations in future with you.
Likewise. Thanks, Manjari. Thanks for having me. I'm going to put the camera and the mic off.
Thank you.
And